wobbly in the beginning, you know why. So it's always the part where I go live that is a bit wobbly to begin with.
No worries.
Let's just wait for this thing to load. And we are live. So this is Black Hot Red. So there's Black Hot Red Spade. We have Chris Clarke, who's a former Goldman Sachs executive director, and he's the founder of and CEO, by the way, of Global Career Accelerators. So Chris has more than 30 years of experience in financial markets and has worked for major global institutions, including Goldman Sachs, as I just mentioned. But he has also managed money for a variety of individuals and institutions along the way, and has served as an expert witness during several financial crimes cases, which we can delve into a bit more later. Additionally, Chris has also worked as a lecturer at the University of West London, where he taught classes in economics and financial markets before leaving and starting Global Career Accelerators, a brand new initiative that aims to help young people get valuable real-world experience before they even apply for their first jobs. Pretty cool, if you ask me. He also happens to be a pretty good musician and even formed a part of a tribute band called the Bogus Beatles, which we will chat about a little bit later. Look, I'm sure that there are many things that I missed out on or left out, but without further ado, Chris, very welcome to the podcast. Glad to have you on.
Well, Adrian, thank you so much for inviting me to come along today and for such a wonderful introduction. A lot to live up to there, and let's hope we just don't go downhill from here.
I very much doubt that we will, but you know, as I've said before, you know, you're someone for whom I genuinely have a lot of time and respect, not only as a professional person in your professional capacity, but also as a friend. You know, I consider you to be a very, very dear person to me. Thank you. To lead into, and one of the reasons being is because of your candidness and your honesty. You've got a very candid way of expressing yourself. And I think that's where I've also had to explain to people at times who don't know you as well as we know one another, that just because someone's candid doesn't mean that they're offensive. And it doesn't mean that they are necessarily looking to inflame, they're not looking to be inflammatory. But without going into detail with that, I would like to know, and I think the viewers would like to know, how did you get started in the whole world of finance?
Yeah, great question. Long time ago as well. So excuse me while I just get the old memory machine churning. I think when I was in my last year at college in the late 1980s, I was very keen to become a commercial airline pilot. And I think the two job applications I had out there was number one, to go off to Cranfield and become a trainee commercial airline pilot with British Airways. But the second application was to join the HSBC graduate recruitment program in foreign exchange trading. And when I didn't make it with British Airways, I did with HSBC. I had a friend at university, incidentally, and she was a young lady, and she was dating a chap who was working at the time in the city, and I used to spend a lot of time talking to him and became very interested in that world. Anyway, it sounded very exciting to me, so I started with HSBC on their graduate training program in 1989. Long time ago.
Yeah, that's what, 30 years ago.
32 years ago. Yeah.
Jeez, you know, so you've essentially been trading markets for nearly as long as I've been alive. I mean, you must have seen a heck of a lot of stuff come and go. How has the game, I mean, apart from electronic trading, which is such an obvious change that we've seen, what has changed regarding the dynamics of the game since when you started versus where we are now?
And that's obviously, that's $1 million question, and a very important question, I think, to answer. And I'm going to completely contradict myself by saying absolutely nothing whatsoever has changed since I started, and perhaps one could also argue everything has changed. So what do we mean by that? I mean, I'm a great believer that financial markets have been around thousands of years. A lot of people don't understand that. The Greeks were great commodities futures traders, and the Romans apparently had a penchant for speculating in currencies. Bringing it more into the last 300 or 400 years, there is lots of data out there, and there's lots of instances of bubbles and collapses and bull markets and new technologies and new risks. And I honestly don't think an awful lot has changed. I think everything we've seen over the last few hundred years, we continue to see. I think the way the markets are accessed is clearly changed due to technology, and that has opened up the doors for the sorts of people who have been able to access the financial markets has changed as well. I think even when we look at, some of the things we all like to moan about in the last decade, like central bank intervention and this crazy interest rate policy that we currently see out there, I think when you go back 100 or 200 years, not a lot's changed there either. A lot of the banking laws that came in the mid 1800s in the USA were about sort of, trying to rid the banks of being too big to fail. And here we are 170 years later and not a lot has changed. I think if we look at what happened in the 1930s after the 29 crash with a lot of central bank, or not central bank, but government stimulus packages and central banks trying to support, I just don't see a lot has changed. And I honestly think at the end of the day, it's always been humans, and it always will be humans, whether individually or through computers, that effectively are the majority of those who make up investing and trading in financial markets. And for that reason, nothing will ever change.
So the more things change, the more they stay the same, pretty much.
To pull out that old French comment, they have an expression for it. It slips my mind at the moment, but the more things change, the more they stay the same. And there's nothing we're seeing at the moment that that doesn't look identical to things that happened in Holland in the 1600s with tulips and with equities in equities in the 1920s and this great tech bubble. We've seen it all before 130 years ago, right? With railroads, with electricity, with wireless communication, it's all been seen, it's all been done. Nothing changes. But unfortunately for young people in particular who are in financial markets now, it's of course, it's a new paradigm, right? And probably one thing I have seen more often than not, only in my short 30-year history in financial markets, is the use of the word new paradigm catching out more people than anything else.
Yeah, so if I'm understanding you correctly, when you say new paradigm, it's more in terms of what's new to you, as a practitioner, or is it, am I understanding that correctly?
Well, no, I think what it is that the number of people who suggest that, it's different this time.
Gotcha.
Yeah, and we are truly in a new paradigm now, what with the internet and technology. And my argument is, no, we're not. There have been 1,000 new paradigms apparently in the last few hundred years, and none of them have fundamentally changed the way humans behave.
Yeah, I think our biology evolves way slower than our technology and our sociology. So the whole euphoria, despair kind of mechanic, or mechanism rather, is not going to change overnight because of new technology that has been implemented.
No, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And I think the only sort of what I'm seeing at the moment is this sort of belief that technology is going to change everything, and that artificial intelligence and machine learning and latency speeds are going to change everything. And I just do not believe that to be the case. I'm sorry. And it's certainly, over the last few years has certainly not been borne out in anything that I've seen. And when people truly begin to understand what they're talking about when they talk about artificial intelligence and machine learning and stuff and how it applies to financial markets, I think they might be in for a bit of a rude awakening, to be honest with you.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, you may recall on a few prior occasions where we've chatted that I love to mention the saying by a famous baseball coach called Yogi Berra. In theory, there's no difference between theory and practice. In practice, there is. What do you consider to be a few of the main areas where the theory simply doesn't hold up in practice? And, you know, to add on to that, what are the what real world impact does that have for practitioners, whether new or seasoned veterans?
Oh, blimey, where do you start? How long have we got on how theory doesn't hold up in practice?
The most important ones.
Well, I think it's very disappointing that, you know, I think most of modern financial theory, starting in the 1950s with modern portfolio theory, is obviously the biggest dose of fairyland kind of theory that has been applied ever since in financial markets that doesn't hold up. The idea that humans are rational, the idea that humans have the same appetite and attitude towards risk, you know, and some of these things were fundamental to Markowitz's modern portfolio theory. It's not. How many times do you need to be proved nonsensical before people wake up to the fact it's nonsense? And then, of course, rolling forward, where I think things of theory has again been harmful actually to certain people is the theory of how to manage risk. And I think the step one on the ladder of how to manage risk is to understand that that life and financial markets are totally unpredictable and anything is possible. And I think as soon as we accept that anything is possible in financial markets, then we may just have a grasp on how to manage risk. But the theories that came about, you know, last century, and particularly in the late 80s with, you know, VAR and value at risk and you know, that we can put numerical values on risk and we can kind of predict what may or may not happen in a best or worst case scenario. I mean, these are the real risks and the real theories that have been, I mean, they've been blown out of the water so many times. You know, if I had a theory on how an aeroplane should be flown and I'd crashed it 100 times, do you not think by now people would be suggesting that my theory was BS? You know, but yet,
yeah, literally.
Financial markets, you know, the same theories are still applied about managing risk. And how many times do we need to see events happen? How many one in a billion year events do we need to see every year in financial markets before we realize something is completely wrong with the way we measure risk?
It's funny you mentioned that, because one of the guys that I interviewed a few episodes ago, and now a new friend, he's a guy called Chris Sidiel. He manages an arbitrage hedge fund in New York. He was on a podcast where he said that humans have a propensity to totally underestimate the probability or the impact of sigma 6 events, pretty much to what you just said, that 1 in a billion kind of event. And you think because it can only happen one or actually twice in a billion on the upside or the downside, obviously. But you think that it can't happen because it's once or twice in a billion. But when it does, oh boy, you know, I mean, it's tickets for you if you're on the wrong side of that trade.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I mean, there are two issues there. I mean, I think the first issue is that human beings are predisposed and wired not to be able to price in or to accept these kind of events. And that comes down to sort of primitive and recency biases that they carry with them. So, you know, if the human being itself is not able to imagine a world that looks dramatically different to what it does right now based on their recency biases, then that opens up all sorts of prospects going forward. So that's problem number one. Problem number two is then carrying that forward into mathematical financial formulas, which then try to numerate what humans can't even accept anyway, and to try to sort of put a number on potentially what the risk is or what could and couldn't happen. And, you know, and a great example would be this. I mean, if me and you were having this conversation on this exact day last year, and I think crude oil was trading, it may have been trading slightly lower, but I don't recall it being dramatically different from where it was now. And if I'd have said to you, you know, Adrian, I think in the next 3 weeks, I think oil is going to be trading at minus $50 a barrel. I think you would have probably suspended this interview right now and had me committed to the nearest hospital for some significant treatment. And that's exactly what
I wouldn't, but many would.
yeah.
Many would.
If I say to you, okay, so let's roll forward to now then. So if I say to you, you know, Adrian, I think within the next 3 weeks, I think Amazon share price will hit zero. You're going to look at me like I'm the craziest person you've ever come across. Now, I'm not suggesting that's going to happen. I'm not suggesting it's likely it's going to happen. But if you don't accept it can happen, then you should not be in the financial markets, and you should definitely not be managing risk, because Bitcoin could easily, by this time next week, be trading at 0 or 10 million. Now, I would suggest to you that either of those is unlikely, but it's absolutely possible. So what is your plan? Okay, what is your system? What risk management technique are you using to make sure you survive both of those outcomes? Because they are absolutely possible. Unlikely, but possible.
Yeah, it's always the difference between what is possible versus probable, and that has been a topic of many conversations for me before, where someone would, for instance, ask me, you know, so what do you think the chance is of Bitcoin hitting, I don't know, 100,000? Yeah. That has been, I said it's possible, yes. Probable right now, no, I wouldn't say it's probable as in right now, or in the next day or next week, but it's definitely possible. Just as it's possible for it to go to 0. But I said, don't misconstrue possibility for probability. I said, any event is possible, but you have to ask yourself how probable that actual thing is. Given infinite time and an infinite universe, any and every event can happen. Absolutely. But we don't have infinite time and we don't have an infinite universe, as far as we know, at least. So
what we could possibly have is a lot more data in front of us than we have behind us. So therefore, you know, to make statistical analyses based on historic data, and you know, if we look at modern day sophisticated, as we sort of know them, financial markets as having probably been around 50 to 100 years, then I would rather be having this conversation with you in 10,000 years time. No chance of that, obviously, where we had 10,000 years more data, and perhaps we could suggest that X, Y, and Z is very possible. We have very little data. The world's been here 6 billion years. We have 50 or 100 years of financial data, yet we have great experts from great expert institutions making great proclamations about what will and won't happen and attaching probabilities to it. And it's simply not possible to do that. And so rather than attaching a probability to a given event happening, what would be more important from a risk management perspective would be to say, what will I be doing? What will I do if that event happens? And so, you know, for me, theory of risk management and practice of risk management is I must know what will happen or what my plan of action is today. What is my plan of action if Amazon hits 0 within 24 hours, or if Bitcoin hits 5 million within 24 hours? Because as stupid as it sounds, you know, the idea that someone was going to pay me $50 to take on a barrel of crude oil this time last year was ludicrous. And if we go back 16 months, if I'd have said to you, you know what, Adrian, I think the entire planet will be locked down and unavailable to leave its house for 12 months. And I think that's going to happen in the next 10 weeks. Again, you would have said I was an absolutely crazy individual. How many more instances of investment bankers on Wall Street standing outside investment banks carrying a cardboard box saying things like, well, who could have seen that coming? How many more times do we have to see this before we start to work out that these things happen all the time, anything is possible, and they happen more than statistically they should do?
Yeah, absolutely. And the other problem, I think, is we can't quantify these outlying events.
No, you can't.
That is why I still think that there is a place for quantitative measures in financial markets, no question about it. But if you think that being a quant and knowing bugger all about how markets actually operate on a supply and demand basis, and you think that you can just implement some kind of algebraic calculus or trigonometric kind of equation, then why aren't all mathematicians billionaires or trillionaires for that matter, if that's the case?
No, exactly. And, you know, it's, you know, listen, I agree with everything you've just said there. I mean, you know, why when we accept that we can't quantify risk and that you cannot attach a number to any of this stuff, then it diminishes a lot of theories out there, doesn't it, and puts a lot of people out of work, and we can't have that happening. So there has to be justification for people to continue to put to quantify risk, to quantify various things when they're not quantifiable. But what I'd also argue is that, just taking it to a slightly different subject, but on a very similar theme, is that, we have spent 100 years analyzing the human brain, and I don't think that we understand 30 or 40% of the human brain after 100 years of continual
Probably
study.
even less.
Yeah, exactly. So the idea now that we're going to model the human brain, okay, when we don't even understand the human brain, is absolute nonsense. Now, assuming that we manage to model the human brain, which ain't going to happen, okay, and then we then are going to model how 3 billion of these brains are going to interact with each other on a given day in a given set of circumstances. Now, the world somehow thinks that artificial intelligence and machine learning, therefore, is going to be able to do this and provide all of our holy grail solutions so we can all rely on technology to make money for us in the financial markets. I mean, to be honest with you, it's beyond a joke. It's beyond laughable. And perhaps I should leave it there.
No, it's a very valid. It's a very valid question. But one of my other bigger questions is, and I do ask existential questions quite frequently because I just don't have the answers, quite simply. But we don't even know what consciousness is, as you said. I don't know what makes me me, and I don't know exactly what makes you you. So I suppose that's where the whole belief system of the soul or the divine spark or whatever you want to call it comes from. But we just don't have the bloody answer to even that question. And as you said, now you want to try and model an entire brain and behavioral analysis and all these kind of things for irrational beings. Yeah, good luck with that. I wonder how that's going to turn out. Oh, I think we kind of know.
Well, I mean, it's very difficult. And I mean, there have been some substantial progression made, in more recent decades towards some level of understanding. And I mean, it's blowing so many older theories out of the water about human behavior. But we're centuries away from fully understanding, if we ever. It's the most complex thing in the universe, right? Perhaps more complex than the universe itself is the human brain. And I don't see it being modeled anytime soon. And therefore, I think a lot of people are in for a lot of disappointment if they think that we're going to, and let's just get back to the financial markets, because I have a bit of a saying I've come up with myself in the last 10 years, which I seem to find myself repeating a lot, is that intelligence and making money in financial markets are totally uncorrelated. So if intelligence has nothing to do with making money, then why would artificial intelligence perform any better?
Excellent question.
I think that if you are able to completely model human emotion, okay, then you may have a chance. But that brings us full circle round to this idea that 100 years of studying of the human brain, we have no idea about conscience, emotions, and the irrationality of human beings. And I don't see it being modeled anytime soon. I don't see computers coming up with the next Sgt. Pepper album, something that's going to move, it's a human emotion thing. You can't model it.
I also think that, it boils down to this, that markets are far more of an art than a science. You can use some scientific methods and statistical methods to aid you, but those are tools, equivalent to having a toolbox to build home. And then you get these practitioners, I only use technical analysis, or I use fundamental analysis, or it's like, you might as well tell me that you're just going to use a hammer to build a home. I mean, are you out of your damn mind to even consider that that is a sensible approach? And yet, that is far more common than what we would think it is.
I think you're right. There are various tools that one can apply in trying to get an edge in this business, and understanding that none of them offer a holy grail. There is no such thing as a holy grail. and just understanding that, you know, getting an edge is very, very difficult, and that there are many tools that you can apply. And, you know, human behavior is perhaps one of the better edges that you can apply. As soon as you understand that anything is possible, and as soon as you can't, and you understand human behavior kind of repeats, then maybe you've got a chance, maybe.
You know what I've discovered to be, you know, just from my own perspective, is something that has helped me a lot, is to become comfortable with saying, I don't know.
Yeah, exactly.
You know,
yeah.
That helped me a heck of a lot. Because I've noticed we're in a game where everyone wants answers. You know, everyone wants to be the guy who predicts the next bull run or the next bear, or, you know, this stock market crash and bear run and all that stuff. But I think the best, me personally, I just think to say, I don't know. You know, I'm everything is based on a best guess, not not on a certain outcome.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we
and it's
all,
with it.
yeah.
Sorry, go ahead, Chris.
Well, I think we all know, you know, when I was like in my 20s, early 30s, I think I sort of had the answers to everything. I knew everything there was to know about financial markets. And now I'm in my early 50s, I've realized I don't really know much at all, to be honest with you. So I think it's an age factor as well. And I think if you take any slightly older professional in whatever their profession might be, and whether that be a senior surgeon or a doctor or a senior airline pilot or whatever, I think one of the characteristics of one of those slightly more mature and experienced people is their admittance that we don't actually, we can't answer that question 100%. I'm sorry. You know, I can't guarantee you as the captain of this plane that isn't going to crash, because I don't know every single scenario that could be chucked at me. And doctors and surgeons certainly won't be pinned down on giving absolute 100% answers to things, because the older you get, the more experience you get, the more you realize that, you know, you've got a small edge that doesn't cover you for every single outcome.
No, definitely not. And I mean, before we even head into GCA, because I really want to talk about, you know, how GCA was founded and what gave you the idea, there is something that I did think I want to ask you, is that, you know, apart from the money aspect, which is why we trade financial markets, let's be honest, and we know it can be very lucrative or very damaging, depending on which side of the trade you find yourself on. Yeah. Is there anything else about this game, for lack of a better word, that you also find incredibly rewarding to you? And are there any prices that you think for playing this game that you pay? Maybe not monetary necessarily, but in other senses.
Yeah, wow, what a question. That is a very good question. I think a lot of it comes down to personality, in terms of what you find enjoyable, satisfying, or rewarding. You know, and I think a lot of people have been in the business a long time, you know, and have no financial justification left to stay in the business, are there because they take a certain amount of value out of other factors, like, you know, not many people on the planet are able to consistently make money in the financial markets, and then therefore to be one of them is a challenge, and that becomes, you know, like climbing Everest. You know, it's more than financial. I think from a cost perspective, and that's the interesting part of the question. Yes, there is a cost, I think, which is that, you know, the same, but, you know, we don't have to limit this to the financial markets. We can again refer back to those dedicated professionals in other areas, and perhaps medicine is one of them, that when you dedicate your life to something and you're passionate about it, that, you know, there is a danger that you can entwine your value as a human being with your success in that chosen profession. And whereas in medicine, I don't know how that would be represented on the downside, but clearly, you know, if you're in finance and you have a few losing years, you have to be very careful that your value as a human being, or the way you value yourself, doesn't deteriorate because you're not having much success. And once again, comparing to those other professions, I think for people who have studied financial markets and devoted their entire existence to them, it's a time-consuming passion. It's a never-ending journey, and, you know, one day, if you're not careful, you can wake up at 50 or 60 years old, having done very little else, and having neglected other areas of your life that perhaps would have given you more balance, whether that be a family or you know, just more of a balanced outlook. Because I think with financial markets in particular, it's a never-ending journey where you want to continuously learn more, and there are so many more things that you want to look at that you just simply haven't got the time. So the danger is you just become too unbalanced in your focus on these things. And we see this in other professions. We see, for example, senior surgeons are, as a profession, and hopefully I'm not going to peeve off too many senior medical practitioners listening, but if you look at addiction centers, specialist centers for treatments of addictions, you normally find if you were to take all the population of those places and say what's the most common profession represented in those places, it's normally the medical profession, and it's normally quite senior surgeons and people like that. And I think so it has a detrimental effect on the mental health to be so heavily focused in such a high pressure environment for so long. Absolutely.
Yeah, I remember speaking to a guy in America who was one of my trading mentors at a particular point in time. This was about 3 years ago or so. And he told me that he read about brain scans that were done on seasoned traders, and they took very similar scans on war veterans. And they found very similar markers of damage on traders versus guys who had just returned from war zones. Now, I don't know if you would agree with that or would think that there's any merit in that, but I did find that rather interesting to think that financial markets could actually be perceived as a war zone of some sort, where you can take literal shots, maybe not as in bullet wounds, but emotional bullet wounds or intellectual bullet wounds. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's an interesting analogy. I feel a bit embarrassed making that comparison from the perspective of, God forbid, that I should ever have to, or anyone in the financial world should ever have
of course.
real hardship, which is having real bullets fired at you. But I can understand.
No, of course, 100%.
I can fully understand the analogy with this perceived battle that one is in. But I think you raise an interesting point, because I think part of the problem that traders and investors have is they believe they're embroiled in some kind of personal battle with people who take the other side of their views and things. And I think that shows a fundamental lack of understanding of financial markets it's not a group of people in the secret room on Wall Street who are driving the market necessarily in one direction or another. It's just an inanimate object. It's sum up all the individual behaviors of 10 million people on a daily basis on the planet, and their views and their thoughts and their ideas and their positions, and you get this inanimate object called a price thrown out. So you're not in battle with individuals or people per se. So it's about, I think, how you manage your own thoughts and feelings by whether you have an outcome bias on given trades and investments that you do. But I can understand, therefore, that the majority of people don't approach financial markets like that and would perhaps feel like they're embroiled in a daily war. And of course, if you have been clobbered and lost a lot of money, then I assume a brain scan would probably show the same effects of having been, coming to near death, because if people value themselves purely by money and find themselves losing all of it, then yes, I suppose it could be compared as an equally nasty trauma to being in a real life-threatening situation.
Yeah, I think it once again shows the effects of the perception versus reality, how powerful the mind can be in terms of creating those shall I call them emotional wounds, or when they did these scans on people, and for instance they found that if they connected these receptors to athletes, they told them to imagine running a race, the same muscles would fire in their legs as if they were running the actual race. So I think this boils down to what you were saying. They perceive it's a battle, even though it's not personal. The market is not a personal thing. You can even tell by people's language, for instance, oh, the market turned against me. Yeah, as if the market even knows you exist, It
reminds me of working in banks and continuously being asked, but you're trading a specific instrument, and you have sales staff and other people around you, and they're like, oh, why did this market stop going up when it went up to 50? And it's like, who is at 50? Who's the seller? And that in and of itself. And that's why I used to embroil myself in so many arguments with salespeople, because I'd say, because that's where that's where the buying ran out, and there were more sellers than buyers. There is no answer to that question. There is no special person who's got this market capped and is selling at 50, and that's going to be the top of the market because they know something that none of us know. That's the kind of thinking that leads people to lose money. Markets go up and down. End of conversation.
I think once again it boils down to what you're saying here, Chris, and this is where I want to move onto GCA and why this got started, because I think this could be part of it too, to some extent. But if you look at the greatest stories in human history, there's always one thing that made them great and very saleable, and that's a wonderful villain. Every successful story has a brilliant villain. From the Bible to the Lord of the Rings to Bloody Wall Street, all of those things have got a great villain. So I think even in today's day and age, where we look at markets, there's always got to be a bloody villain, whether it's yields affecting the stock market, or whether it's the dollar affecting Bitcoin, or vice versa, or I'm just making up stupid examples, but you see where I'm coming from with that. Or central banks, okay, they are a bit of a villain, but let's not delve too deeply into that.
Yeah, no, I mean, obviously a lot of people have held out, the villains to be central banks in the last few years, or, and sort of, manipulating markets, yada, yada, yada. And, obviously whenever there's a financial catastrophe like 2008, then clearly it's all hedge funds' faults. If you're part of the European regulatory system, it must always be, Anglophile speculators who must be blamed for everything. Rather than looking at their own shortcomings about the way they manage their own economies, or the way that things get managed. But I agree with you that there always has to be a villain. And, funnily enough, when we look at I think you mentioned Wall Street in there somewhere. I mean, it's a movie. I'm never ceased to be fascinated by the movie Wall Street, about how Gordon Gekko, I mean, Oliver Stone, obviously directed the movie and appeared in it, funnily enough, as well, if you know where to look. I think he'd always been on the left of centre in political terms. And I don't know what kind of statement he was trying to make, and whether he tried to portray Gordon Gekko as some kind of villain. But for me, Gordon Gekko was the only honest person in the film, right? Everyone else was a hypocrite. Everyone else wanted to get a little bit pregnant. He was the only guy in the film who sort of was honest about what he wanted and how he got it.
Blue Horseshoe loves Anacott Steel. Remember that line? I'm sure that stuff still happens today. I'm absolutely convinced it does, even if people tell me, no, that's just for movies. But we don't need to.
Very, very much, very much it happens today. And one thing that's probably the takeaway from that movie, and talking of philosophy of things, is the greed is good speech that I know that many universities around the world, Harvard being one of them, sort of teach students about that speech and analyze that speech and talk about it, and the existential meaning of the fact that greed in all its forms, for love, for money, for life, for knowledge, is a good thing. So why is greed for money a bad thing? It's a human characteristic. If we weren't greedy by default, then the human race wouldn't exist. If you say to me, Chris, do you want to live 50 years or 100 years? I'll take 100. Thank you very much. So what is wrong with reflecting? And then, of course, you've got the cognitive, well, we've got a conscience. We're meant to be more intelligent than that, et cetera, et cetera. But, it's human behavior. It's part of our instinct to want more. And that's what's kept us going as a species. So, fascinating film. We digress.
Absolutely. No, absolutely fascinating film. But, you just mentioned Harvard teaching and all these kind of things. When you were at the University of West London, and this is before you started Global Career Accelerators, I remember you telling me during one of our conversations that you used to make students watch The Big Short as part of their education, because that's actually more educational than reading bloody economic textbooks, which I agree with you, by the way, 100%. Yeah. But, what did you pick up, over the years of being there in the educational system, because something that I've noticed, especially when reading educational material, is a lot of it's useless. So much of it is absolutely useless in the real world. And I think that watching The Big Short arguably is a better way of teaching students about what's going on in the real world, as opposed to what some textbook is telling you ought to happen.
Yeah, listen, I mean, I've been, just to qualify, I mean, I've been involved with, up to about 10 universities in the last 8 or 9 years. I've worked with many universities around the country, independently, before I set up Global Career Accelerators. And, listen, I mean, universities, I think, have done and continue to do the best they can with the circumstances that they've got. I'm despite anything that may be said to the contrary, I believe that in things like engineering and law and medicine, that we have the finest university system in the world. And I would urge, if I had children, I would urge them to go to university to study those subjects. I think the problem comes down more to the business, the economics, the finance, the tech side of things. When we look at a rapidly changing world, which industry, let's be fair, struggles to keep up with. And so universities are struggling more than most in terms of trying to keep up with what's going on in the real world. And therefore, by the time students have gone through a 3-year degree program, what they began learning is out of date.
Absolutely.
But I think more than that, and as is recognized by universities as well, is that there needs to be more of a move towards skills and relevant experiences in commercial subjects. And that's where I came into this world. My mandate when I started working with universities was actually in Nottingham in 2012, which was to try to introduce more industry experience, industry skills, and a more real world flavor to the curriculum, such that students could combine their academic studies, which, were, I'll leave someone else to be the judge of how relevant they are, but, to combine that with experiences. And so they got the best of both worlds. And, I think that, roll forward to a couple of years ago, and I was at the time working with University of West London, who are a very forward-thinking university. And in fact, in 2019, won the Times Higher Education Business School of the Year awards, actually. So, they did well for themselves, very forward-thinking. And part of the reason I worked with them was because they were forward thinking and they understood the need to bring in more experiential learning, et cetera, et cetera. So as part of Global Career Accelerators, we still have a very close relationship with Claudelit, the business school, because of their, they are forward thinking, as well as the many other universities that we now currently work with globally. But the idea really was to try to bring in more skills and experience.
Absolutely, and this is why, and this is where I would like you to delve into GCAs. And how did you come up with the idea to create something like GCA? Because it's a concept to be able to help someone get work experience before they get their first job. It's absolutely remarkable.
Yeah. Oh, thank you. And I think that, so for me, I think, a lot of people are kind of driven by their own personal experiences. And for me, I had an interesting one when I was young. I grew up with a bunch of guys, or went to school with a bunch of guys who all subsequently went off to Oxford and Cambridge. And academically, I did try very hard. I wouldn't say I'm not intelligent at all. I think measuring intelligence is something that needs to be done on many levels. But academically, I struggled a little bit, and I struggled to get into a university, let alone into Oxford and Cambridge. And then when we all left university, we all then lived together again, with each other again, and I did really well for myself. I went off to Goldman, and did very well in the 1990s, and a lot better than these guys who'd gone to Cambridge. And I kind of had a chip on my shoulder about the fact I never got into a good university, but I felt that I was so motivated and so driven, that they were the qualities that were needed. So, roll forward 10 or 20 years, and I sort of got the bit between my teeth about this idea of, finding students who were perhaps not coming from the sorts of backgrounds that they supposedly needed to come from, but who were motivated and really wanted to do a good thing and really wanted to succeed. and picking those people out and saying, look, the only thing you need for success is motivation and a wanting to succeed. And you don't have to be academically brilliant. You don't have to be at Imperial London studying rocket science or Cambridge University studying economics, because I didn't do that and I did all right. And so the idea was really born by saying, well, sort of, let's go back into the university system and start to give these people contacts and real world experience, and start giving them the sorts of things that would get them a really good job. And when I started at Nottingham, what we found was some of the students were sort of leaving before they finished their degrees because they've got so much experience in this virtual hedge fund that I'd set up for them, that employers were kind of snatching them up, and they were like, well, to hell with bothering to finish my economics degree because I don't need it. They were getting job offers before they finished. So the idea really was, it was to give people, young people, a platform with which they could get the skills and experience that they needed, and the kick up the bum to point them in the right direction. And universities are obviously open to that idea now, so we kind of facilitate working with universities such that they can put students in our direction, and we can sort of work with the motivation and the wanting to succeed, and we can sort of furnish them with a lot of relevant skills and industry experience, and a network that they can then work with to get themselves to where they want to be.
Yeah, I mean, it's like I recently stated that, from my perspective and the dealings that I've also had with GCA, is that it follows what I would call a Bruce Lee approach: adopt what is useful, reject what is useless, add what is uniquely yours, especially as a student. Let's not even delve into the useless part. There are so many useless things that can actually be mentioned that we would take all day. I mean, it's about chipping away at the end of the day, chip away the inessential. What do you consider to be the most useful things you can adopt from this approach at GCA to give yourself a fighting chance? I mean, a fighting chance is sometimes all we really need to be able to get to a point of success.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's a very good question. I think that, blimey, I mean, we're trying to change the mindset of people, trying to get them to sort of take their already inherent motivation and willingness to succeed, and give them some confidence and say, there's actually no reason why you shouldn't be able to succeed here. And motivation and passion, I think, are incredibly important skill sets that if young people have got those, then they're already halfway on the journey. So equip them with some further skills that are particularly relevant to an industry, and some further experiences, and give them an edge, in terms of other potential applicants into jobs. And I think, you've got a winning formula there. I hope that's kind of how it works anyway.
No. It sounds like it to me, but I think it also points out a really interesting point here, that you don't need a 5 or 6 year degree to be able to be a very successful financial markets practitioner in a variety of fields.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I think it's the same in, as you rightly say, there are a lot of fields. I mean, we offer experiences for people from anywhere from like a month through to a year, and we think that's long enough. And if we're working in conjunction with universities and they're already getting their academic study stuff fulfilled with the university, and we can just add on that sort of extra 3, 6, 9 months of experience for them to combine with what they're doing academically, then that should give them a real boost and a real edge to propel them forward. I think education is changing. I mean, I think you have to start with just a quick look at the way the education system's changed. I mean, when I was very lucky in my day, and when I went off to Polytechnic, as it was then, that I got paid by the government to do this. I got a grant, and so a lot of people say to me, with regards to global career accelerators, but look, university is about so much more than just getting skills, right? I mean, it's about a sort of, you're leaving home, you're learning to fend for yourself, you're mixing with new people. It's about this, it's about, becoming aware as a young adult. And listen, I don't disagree with that, but there's a huge difference between paying a £50,000 bill to get to that place now than having been paid to do it 30 years ago. So I do think that it is essential for young people, particularly when they are faced with huge debts and having to put themselves in a financially precarious situation. I think it's essential that they get the skills that they need to get a good job. It's not about saying, well, I'm gonna spend a lot of money on fees and get myself into a huge hole of debt, and then not have much of a chance of getting anything at the end of it. I mean, that's going to make the entire economy unsustainable. That makes everything unsustainable. Look at the US, $1.5 trillion of outstanding student debt. I mean, that puts an unsustainable weight on the entire financial system of the USA. So it is important. So we don't want to therefore stop students going to university. Not at all. What we're saying is, if you are going to continue with this kind of debt structure or this debt problem, then it becomes more important, more imperative than ever that these students are getting good jobs. And in order to do that, we need to equip them not only with the wonderful things that they can get from university and the academic studies, but let's give them some skills and experience and make sure they get those good jobs, so that they can effectively pay off their debts and presumably more than that, become, successful and comfortable financially people who don't have to live with a burden of debt on their shoulders for the rest of their life. So, it sort of ticks many boxes. And obviously, the way things are in the system at the moment is that there is a bit of a skills gap still. And, so let's work with the system to fill that gap. And we work with some young people as well. We work with people in 16, 17, 18 as well, who sort of, look at what we're doing and think, well, in a gap year or prior to going to university, I will, find out what kind of work is going on out there. And they come to us and we put them into all sorts of different roles, whether it be managing portfolios or risk management, accounting, blockchain research and development, digital marketing, and they can get a real handle on perhaps the sort of things they'd like to do at university or beyond. It's been fascinating. It's a fascinating journey to see people come to us and what they end up doing.
It also seems like a massive privilege, to be able to help someone, figure out what they want to do with the rest of their lives. Because
absolutely,
this is the other thing that I also wanted to ask you. What are your entry requirements, for example, to be able to become a student on any of these courses? Are they similar ones to university, or is this a little bit different?
Well, yeah, I mean, very different. So firstly, I mean, it's not courses. We don't run courses. What we do is we run, effective real world.
For lack of a better word.
Yeah, no. So I mean, we're not dishing out courses, and we're certainly not dishing out these kind of, we're going to plant a load of videos for you to watch in your own time and go over the same old ground. We're giving people, young people coming to us, they get given a job on day one. This is your role in our accelerator. You are a portfolio manager. You are a risk manager. You are in digital marketing. You're going to be running real campaigns. You're going to be, doing real world stuff. You're going to be managing workflow, et cetera, et cetera. So, they come in now. The question there about the entrance requirements just goes back to what I was saying earlier. The only entrance requirement is a passion and a motivation to want to succeed. Okay. That's the only thing, because that's all they need, and we'll do the rest. If someone's got a passion for something and someone's really motivated, then you've got the raw dough to sort of form into something that is then going to go out there and be really successful. And we have dealt with such a broad range of young people, and I just want to bear reference to we work with Burami University in Oman, and they sent us a cohort last year, and that was you talk about satisfying. The level of some of the students that came from the Oman University was was not great on some levels, no fault of their own. It was just, you know, the age they were at and some of the things they've been exposed to. And, you know, to
And
see,
language barrier, I suppose, sometimes can
yeah,
also have an effect, can't
yeah,
it?
absolutely. The language barrier can have an effect, but you know, we sort of, and the other thing that was fantastic was that they were all females. I mean, you know, in the Middle East,
I remember.
a lot of the students are female because that's just the way it is. All right, we don't need to question it. But I think we had one fellow and you know, and 20 ladies. And I mean, you know, to see them sort of almost blossom over the course of a month from not wanting to say boo to a goose on day one to one of them running actually designing part of our actual website and running a media campaign for us, and other students, you know, actively sort of, you know, in a simulated way, obviously not with real money, but sort of, you know, actively managing portfolios in financial markets and really getting enthusiastic and passionate about it. I mean, that's a very satisfying thing to see people, and you bring them out of their shell, you give them the confidence, and you say, look, you really want to do this, you're really motivated, you know, and you've got what it takes, and give them that boost and send them on their way, going back with some relevant skills and experience and more knowledge about what it is they want to do at the end of it, you know.
Yes, but doesn't it just show you how little encouragement people often need just to take that step to get ahead? Such little encouragement, if you really think about it.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, I mean, just to, you know, sorry to bring it back to myself on this point, but
No, please go ahead.
well, no, I remember when I left uni myself and I went to HSBC on their graduate recruitment program. They had a graduate recruitment program that was a bit like the army, and it was a bit stern and it was a bit scary, and you know, it was people shouting and screaming at you quite a lot, you know, and that's the image that you know, young people I think have when they're going into sort of trading and investing, is that, oh my God, you know, it's a real high pressure environment, which it is on some level, but I didn't thrive particularly well in that environment because, you know, it was people shouting and screaming at you, and it puts your confidence down a little bit, if I'm honest. But when I went to Goldman, they were like, well, here's your screens, here's a phone, you know, off you go, you know, sink or swim. And I'm sure I'm sure you can cope, and you know, and then give you that encouragement, and then you become confident in yourself, and that really sort of sends you on your way. So, you know, giving people the confidence in themselves that they can do this. And you know what, I don't care that you haven't got a fantastic academic background, and I don't care that you're doing woodwork at XYZ university and you're going to get a third class honors degree. If you're blooming passionate about this area and you really want to chuck yourself into it, then you know you've got a very good chance of being successful here. You really have. You don't need to worry about the other stuff, as long as you give us your motivation and your passion. And you know, I think that sort of gives us a level playing field as an organization to take on people where we're saying, we don't care where you're from. Well, you know, we're looking at quite a wide age group, male, female, black, white, yellow, blue. Just give us some motivation, some enthusiasm, and tell us you want to be successful, and you know, and we'll do the rest.
I think that's why I would have been a brilliant student, because I also didn't study financial markets. I mean, everything that I learned is from people such as yourself and other mentors and other colleagues and peers that along the way. And quite honestly, I think I'm actually learned this way than what I would have been if I came from a structured finance degree or any of those things, where I would have fallen this way, where I would have relied overly much on my degree to give me validity as opposed to giving validity to my degree. You know, so sometimes I think there's a bit of a disconnect between those two.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think if you but you know, getting the best of both worlds would, I think, ideally be the best scenario. And
absolutely,
you know, and so, you know, giving people that opportunity, and you know, sort of, you know, facilitating universities also to give their students that additional experience and skill set on top of the other stuff is obviously very, very beneficial. And you know, and giving people an opportunity as well. I mean, that's a great thing, you know, to sort of deal with, you know, global universities, for example, or global individuals who perhaps thought, well, I don't think I've got much of a chance of making it in this world, and saying, well, actually, you know what, you have, because you might have more of the what you need than you think. And you know, let's get some experience under our belt, and you'll see. And they listen. You know, the people who come through Global Career Accelerators love it. They have a very good time. They really enjoy themselves. And you know, we're building up a sort of network and an alumni of people who have been through us, and we're going to be very keen to sort of keep a record and keep close touch, have an alumni of all those people who have been through us, and see where they end up. You know, and signs are pretty good so far.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm glad that you mentioned earlier, for instance, that it doesn't matter where you are, you know, whether you're doing woodwork or pottery or, for example, any of those things. Because I also think that IQ, for instance, doesn't necessarily determine success in this game, as you mentioned. You know, the whole thing that you said about intelligence, but also IQ is often very misunderstood. You know, most people don't even know that there are two types of IQ, or two main types of IQ, rather. In other words, your fluid.
Go on.
Yeah. Well, like for instance, fluid IQ and crystallized IQ. So fluid IQ is, you know, for those who might not know this, is your ability to assimilate and process new information, and how quickly you can solve problems with brand new information. Your crystallized IQ is the IQ, which is your knowledge base, essentially speaking. So interestingly enough, your fluid IQ actually goes down as you get older, but your crystallized IQ peaks at around, they say around 25. I don't know if that's true or not, but they say it peaks around 25 and remains relatively the same. Now, interestingly enough, if you want to hold your fluid IQ as high as possible, physical exercise is one of the few ways that they know of that you can actually sustain your fluid IQ well into your old age. But that is just a prime example of how even IQ is completely misunderstood in terms of you know, the effect that it can have on your success or not. Look at Bobby Fischer. You know, remember the chess player from years back, Bobby Fischer? He had an IQ of, I kid you not, over 180. But and that was at the age of 12 that they figured out that he had that IQ. But he could only play chess and read comic books with his 180 IQ. So I think there is also a diminishing marginal utility when it comes to something like IQ, where more points being added are not going to help you a lot.
Yeah. Well, listen, I totally agree with you. And, you know, I think emotional intelligence is obviously, particularly in the world of finance, markets, is super important. But I mean, I can tell you a quick funny story if you want, just very quickly.
Yeah, please.
About just the representative. I mentioned earlier about how I went off to a Northern Polytechnic and my friends went to Cambridge, and then we all lived together again. Well, about a year after we all moved back to London together, those two, the two other guys, one of them was an engineer from Cambridge, and the other one did economics, and they bought a wok. They'd been out and bought a wok, and it said that you had to oil this wok before you used it for the first time. And the pair of them had oiled the outside of the wok and then put it on the stove.
Please tell me it wasn't a gas stove. Please tell me it wasn't one of those.
Yeah, it was. Oh, it was. This thing went up. This thing went up like a firework, I tell you. And it was like, and I thought to myself, listen, I'm sure there's maybe some people, but nothing wrong with Cambridge's favourite city in the UK. Wonderful, intelligent people.
Beautiful, yeah.
All I'm saying is that the dozy sort of Polytechnic graduate probably wouldn't have done that, and the Cambridge engineer and the Cambridge economist had oiled the outside of this wok by mistake. And you know, so yeah, I totally take your point on the different types of intelligence and how they are applicable. And listen, I am so, you know, when you see mathematicians and these young kids who are able to sort of find the square root of a number that has got 10,000 digits and they can do it in less.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Listen, I mean, it's absolutely unbelievable. And you know, great mathematicians and great computer experts, wonderful. But, you know, at the end of the day, if I buy something at 10 and sell it at 11, I've made money. And I'm not too sure where the IQ needs to come from in order to do that. And people seem to have lost a bit of sight of that at the moment. You know, we must have tech. It's all about computers. You know, if I had one of those old rotary telephones and I'd called up my broker, you know, 5 years ago and said, you know, hello, Charles, you know, get me into some of this Bitcoin thing. And I'd done nothing for 5 years. And I called him back today and picked up the rotary telephone and sold the Bitcoin. I would have made 100,000%. And I don't see where my IQ or technology was particularly important in that chain of events.
No, timing the markets versus timing the markets. Once again, you know, it's just one of those classic examples, as you said.
Yeah.
But you know, Chris, I was looking at in the background of your, you know, your screen with your bookshelf and all that, and I noticed that guitar standing over there. And yeah, I think we would all love to know a little bit more about your hobby, your bogus Beatles and everything else. I find these things fascinating because it's part of what makes you you. It makes you tick. Tell us a bit more about that.
Well, you say that. I'm sure my wife would just call it a midlife crisis.
Nah.
No. Listen, you know, my father Keith bought me a guitar when I was 10, and I think on the same Christmas he bought me a couple of Beatles albums, and I've been obsessed with the Beatles for the last 40 years. So, and I've always been messing around with the guitar and etc. etc. But yeah, about 7 or 8 years ago, I got a chance to join a sort of local, well, at the time, it was just a village Beatles tribute band as Paul McCartney. Can you believe? And yeah, we were very good, if I don't say so myself. And we got signed up by a small label in Newcastle who ended up sort of pumping us out there as a house band at a big venue 3 nights a week. And there I was, you know, at the end of that experience, headlining festivals and things as part of this Beatles tribute band, which was quite something. That's all finished now, but you know, the only takeaway from that, perhaps, which we can intellectualize about a little bit more, was that Paul McCartney, for those who don't know, was a left-handed bass player. So I decided to teach myself to play left-handed.
I love telling that story.
which took about a year of an hour a day practice to do that. But that was a bit of an eye-opener for me, because it showed you that with constant practice in anything, you can change the brain to do things that naturally it really has never been trained to do, or perhaps doesn't even want to do. So that was quite something. And you know, rolling forward to now, yeah, music is a good outlet, I think, as a flow activity to get away from any kind of stresses and pressures. So we're trying to make a record at the moment. I've got a little home recording studio, and we're going to, I've got a number of songs that I've written over the years. I'm going to record those and try and put something out there. So I'll send you a copy of that, which you can,
yeah, please,
which you can then forward on to your mum for a Christmas present. So yeah, so that
sounds good to me. But yeah, I fully agree with you. I think music, you know, to draw into the close over here with everything, and I think it's really important, as you mentioned, to have an outlet, and especially if you work in this field, because one of the prices I've had to pay for being in financial markets is that it's incredibly consuming. It consumes your thoughts, it consumes your emotions, and all that kind of stuff. And I have a tendency to become a little bit more obsessive about things, especially when I want to win. And that's one of my personality defects, that, whatever you want to call it, that I have to deal with. So for me, for instance, physical training is important, but also I do like playing a little bit of piano. If I have access to a piano, I enjoy playing a little bit. But I think I'm really glad to see that you also have that kind of outlet, because I think if you don't have an outlet, you can actually go crazy and literally blow up in so many ways.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree with you. I think it's essential for anybody to have. I think science is now putting, I'm not sure if it's science or more the sort of psychology kind of area field, is putting a name on this now as being what's called a flow activity, you know. And you know, what technology is enabling us to do now is to, you know, look at various brain scans and monitor activity in the brain, understand the real scientific effects that this kind of stuff is having on us. And, you know, exercise and flow activities, whether that be painting or drawing or, you know, music or whatever your passion is outside of work, they're essential. They are essential for good sort of cognitive balance. And obviously, given the fact that we've all been locked down in our respective domains for getting on for 12 or 13 months with the odd let up, never has it been more important to try to have some kind of level or some kind of outlet, some kind of balance. So for me, it served me reasonably well, although I still wish I'd have done more with the whole musical thing earlier. And incidentally, I'm very jealous of your piano playing abilities. It's something I've always wanted to do. I can only manage a few tunes on the old Joe.
Me too. Me too. But it's still nice being able to do that. I mean, there's such a release to it, and it's also taught me more of an appreciation for guys like Paul McCartney, as you alluded to earlier, in terms of what they are capable of doing. I mean, never mind Lennon or the guys from the Rolling Stones or Pink Floyd, Led Zeppelin. I mean, if you look at Britain, for instance, I've always marveled at the incredibly large number of musicians that have come from such a Britain relative to other parts of the world. I mean, if you look at some of the greatest bands and solo musicians, Eric Clapton, Queen, Led Zeppelin, Pink Floyd, Beatles, Rolling Stones, the list goes on. It literally is remarkable to see that, and I just think that if you have the ability to enjoy music, go for it. There's nothing that should ever stop you or hamper you from doing that.
No, absolutely. And you sort of mentioned McCartney there. I mean, when we talk about computers modeling human emotions, and I mentioned earlier on about I personally, whereas I'm fully aware of the fact that there's plenty of albums and pictures out there that have been generated by algorithms and technology. I mean, when a computer writes something as good as Yesterday or Sergeant Pepper, then I'll be convinced that humans are redundant. But ain't gonna happen. Sorry. And yeah, what a miracle of behavior it was, and what a random event that you have the one musical genius running into another musical genius with the meet of Lennon and McCartney. And always having that kind of systematic approach to things, and hearing your observation about the UK and its the way it's sort of born so many famous musicians. I think that a lot of that is to do with the ports and the seafaring nature of the country. In the 50s and 60s, a lot of the Black American blues music and a lot of the jazz music coming out of the US, the first place it ever came to when it came across the Atlantic, it was into Liverpool, into the port, and into the northwest of England, and then fed down into London from there. So that's how the Beatles got hold of Elvis records and Little Richard records and all that kind of stuff earlier than most. But yeah, remarkable, and so many bands that you mentioned there that are so fantastic. So yeah, all good stuff.
Chris, it's been such a pleasure talking with you, and I know that we could carry on all black day if we really wanted to. I just wanted to say thank you for your time and for your incredible insights. And I very much look forward to seeing yourself and GCA going from strength to strength. And I'm also glad to be involved with it in my own capacity. It's such a pleasure for me to be involved with the organization. So thank you for that too.
Well, yeah, listen, Adrian, thank you so much for having me on the podcast here. Extremely appreciative. Fantastic experience to come on and talk about these things. So as you say, it's always a pleasure. We pick these kind of conversations up on the phone and anyway, regardless whether we're live or not at any given moment.
Yeah.
And look forward to your input over Easter and towards the end of March for what we're doing at Global Career Accelerators. And we keep our fingers crossed that we keep pushing forward what we're trying to do, and that people get the benefit from that. So, but thanks very much for having me on today. It's been a real pleasure. Thank you.
Perfect. And anyone who wants to have a look at this, by the way, it's www.globalcareeraccelerators.com. So, you can just go to the website, take a look, and take it from there. If you want to sign up, I'm sure Chris wouldn't mind helping you guys out to get going. So yeah, thanks a lot, Chris. I really appreciate your time, and I look forward to speaking to you again soon.
Lovely. Thank you very much.